Every successful retirement comes down to mastering one number. And while important, this number is actually not your net worth, it's not your savings rate, and it's not your withdrawal percentage. To prove this point, let's actually talk through an example of somebody who struggled with this number, who had everything else that he could have possibly imagined. This individual had over $60 million. He was considered the best in the world in his specific field over 23 times. He was in the headlines at least every single 4 years as probably the most recognizable person on the planet. And he was even on the Wheaties box twice. However, 6 months after retirement, sitting alone in his Baltimore apartment, he faced substance abuse issues, he faced depression, and worse yet, he even contemplated suicide. And that man was Michael Phelps. Despite having seemingly everything that you or I could possibly imagine, a net worth that puts you in the top 1% of the top 1%, and having more fame and accomplishments than any of us could have possibly dreamed of, Michael Phelps still battled something that all of us could potentially battle if not properly planned out, and that's a lack of purpose, specifically in retirement when you decide to step away from your called vocation. And that brings us to the number that you need to have an accounting for, and that number is 168. Every single person in retirement, regardless of how much you have, regardless of how you're invested, and regardless of your taxable situation, will have 168 hours in retirement. How you fill those 168 hours is what's going to give your life purpose, meaning, and frankly, should be how you set up your financial plan around it. And before you know what retirement looks like, whether that involves travel, whether that involves volunteering, or continuing to work even though you're beyond the retirement age, whichever of those factors could be at play for you, you want to make sure that your lifestyle is covered first and the finances follow. After all, how do you know if you'll need $600,000 or $2 million or $10 million or $50,000 for retirement? Until you define what that retirement plan will look like and what your actual lifestyle will look like, it's impossible to know how much you should have, how it should be invested, what the taxes should look like, etc. Retirees without a clear sense of purpose can often fall into two camps, which can lead to a devastating retirement. The first one is that they overspend. They instead focus on trying to fill the void that has been left by taking expensive vacations, buying a secondary home that they may not need, or otherwise just living a lifestyle in which they're trying to recreate what they had before. If you're trying to fill an emotional void left by your career, overspending is usually not a recommended strategy to help fill that void. On the flip side, we often see retirees who can come in with a sense of anxiety of running out of money. Therefore, they underspend their dollars. They'll hoard everything that they've had after years and years of saving and have no plan to actually utilize their life savings that they've built up. Without a sense of purpose, instead, they just focus on keeping everything that they've earned and making sure that if the absolute worst happens, that they're still okay. And believe me, we see it and understand why this happens for both the overspending and the underspending categories. Instead of enjoying the life savings that you have in a responsible way, we see retirees who instead fall into deep financial stress and ultimately deep dissatisfaction. But we've also met retirees who have been energized by entering into the next phase, by knowing what they're retiring to, not just what they're retiring from. By giving each and every one of your dollars a sense of purpose of what they're intended to do, you can be the one running your finances and not have your finances running you. To illustrate this a little better, let's talk through two quick examples here. Let's meet a hypothetical couple, Bob and Joan. Bob's been working for the last 35 years in the telecommunications business. His wife, Joan, has been a homemaker, and she's had plenty of work to do raising 4 children. They're now in their mid-60s, and they're certainly not wealthy, but they would consider themselves financially comfortable. Bob is now at a point where he's making more money than he ever has in a senior position at a company which is doing very well and is a stable position. Being that he's had to provide for his 4 children and his wife through the years, he hasn't been able to save necessarily what he would want to have an account balance to allow him to just simply retire today and step away from everything. But Bob also loves the work that he does. He gets to work from home. He gets to set his own schedule. He gets his work done and finds meaning in it. And most importantly, he loves the people that he works with. Retirement for Bob is no longer just about stepping away from work and then stepping into something unknown. Instead, he can work towards continuing his current schedule, but scaling back if he needs to spend more time with kids and grandkids if that's what he wants to do. And that's where defining your 168 really comes into play. For Bob to be able to step back even part-time, he would be freeing up hours throughout his week that he would somehow need to fill otherwise. And maybe it can be recreational activities, or maybe it could be something that involves a passion of his, and whether or not that's going to cost additional dollars will then dictate part of the financial planning. For Bob and Joan, it may make sense for Bob to delay his Social Security until age 70. As a result, he's able to make sure that any lack of savings that he and Joan would have accrued can be made up in guaranteed income for the rest of his life, and if Joan outlives Bob, for the rest of Joan's life. They also want to take advantage of strategic tax planning, whether both saving or considering conversions, to make sure that if Bob passes away, that Joan is left in a favorable position if and when Bob passes away early, if she becomes a single tax filer. But again, they also want to minimize the amount of tax due. So making sure that they have a diversified set of savings from a tax standpoint is equally as important as it is for their investment planning. They also want to make sure that their investment plan is focused on balance. Being that Bob does have stable income and is planning to continue to work, they still can take some risk within their plan, being that they're both in good health and could potentially live a long time. But they also want to make sure that in the event that Bob were to stop working or would decide to step away, that they have a plan in place to cover income that would be necessary for both Bob and Joan to live off of. Again, this can be subject to change as Bob and Joan's life changes as well. Looking at a different example, Steve and Carol, we can see a couple who both worked for a longer period of time. Carol would have retired early from her demanding law career. Steve, on the other hand, just wrapped up a successful construction management career. They've both worked hard through the years and spent many times involved in their work. But being that they felt satisfied and very proud of the work that they did, they're now ready to leave work behind them. As a result, they're wanting to travel the world and wanting to enjoy different things that they hadn't been able to do because work held them back all these years. So instead, they're focused on taking 4 international trips per year. They're looking to take their children on a trip for at least one of them. They also want to spend time in their new home that they just purchased. And Carol's passionate about helping younger women in the legal profession and mentoring them. So as a result, they've had their 168 hours planned out ahead of time. And while it may look different than Bob and Joan, they've planned accordingly. And they also have a plan to spend accordingly. They both have higher income earning years. So as a result, we've been able to coordinate a strategy that's focused on maximizing Social Security for both Steve and Carol. They're also at a point where they have quite a bit of pre-tax savings. So when they reach the required minimum distribution age, they will likely have more than they need to spend. By developing a Roth conversion strategy, they can look to utilize some of the dollars now at a known rate versus in the future at an unknown rate with their RMDs. We've also focused quite a bit on non-qualified planning to make sure that they're able to utilize these dollars for larger purchases and again, potentially to help offset tax that would be due on Roth conversions. And their portfolio is set up for exactly their type of planning. They have short-term wants and needs, which involve travel, but they're also in good health, understanding they could live for another 25 to 30 years in retirement and need to have a portion of their portfolio that's focused on growth to be able to keep pace with inflation. But as you can probably imagine, this type of planning becomes simpler and clearer once we get a picture of what the retirement looks like. The plans, the concerns, the threats, and the risks all become much clearer when you have a vision in mind and can plan ahead for the future. Now, we don't know what will happen in Washington with tax policy. We don't know what will happen with interest rates. We surely don't know what will happen with the market and market-based returns. But we can plan accordingly with each of these things when we know what their lifestyle is going to look like and what they want it to look like. While Bob and Joan and Steve and Carol have very different 168 hours that are filled, have different level of savings, both can enjoy a meaningful retirement and one that can be done on their terms. And however they define their best retirement, it can be lived out and planned for ahead of time. And that's a life worth living. And as for Michael Phelps, thankfully there's a happy ending with this. After hitting rock bottom, Michael sought help. He was able to seek therapy and was able to confront some of the demons that he was facing and find a way that he could give himself meaning in retirement despite not dominating in the pool for many years. He has launched his own foundation, the Michael Phelps Foundation, which helps younger folks who are going through the same issues that he battled. After living one of the most meaningful athletic careers that somebody could possibly have, and finding that meaning in retirement is even more important than the financial success that he's been able to build. If you need help building out your 168-hour plan, be sure to check out HyperionFP.com. We help retirees focus on living their best retirement, whether that involves continuing to work, whether it involves staying away. However it is that you define your best retirement, we're here to help along the way. Also, be sure to check out the quiz in the description, in which we talk quite a bit about tax planning and the different ways in which we can help. We'll send you a free video of what we think your tax plan consists of and how you can make sure that you're on your path to your best retirement.